Hi, and welcome back to TruthatWorks. For the month of July, we'll be focusing on the topic of servant leadership. And today, we'll be looking at a 3-minute devotional based on the story of Jesus washing the disciples' feet. It's found in John chapter 13. And if you're not familiar with this story, it happens right before Jesus goes to the cross. And the passage begins like this. Now before the feast of the Passover, when Jesus knew that his hour had come to depart from this world to the Father, Jesus was preparing himself for the most gruesome and painful death that anyone could think or imagine. But instead of bringing comfort to himself, Jesus wanted to bring comfort to others, and he modeled this throughout his entire life. He wanted to teach his disciples what true servant leadership looks like, and he models it for them in this passage. While the disciples ate supper, Jesus excuses himself, grabs a basin of water and a towel, and walks back to the disciples and begins washing their feet. Now, in case you are not familiar with this particular practice, washing feet was usually left as the task of the servant or slave of the household. And in a primarily agricultural society, washing feet was not an enviable task. When guests arrived at the home, the servant would remove the sandals of the guests and begin washing their feet. The idea was that washing feet would remove anything filthy that one encountered on their journey. Now, one could roam inside the house without bringing the outside in. So imagine the dirt, sweat, and animal residue that one might find between the toes of some of your guests. And if no servant existed in the home, the basin of water and the towel was left near the entrance so the guests could wash their own feet. The idea was that the homeowner never washed feet. Now, can you imagine the shock the disciples felt when Jesus began washing their feet? At first, Peter refused to let the Lord do that to him. He said, "Lord, are you washing my feet?" That could be translated, "Jesus, you are not a servant, so do not stoop to such shame." In fact, Jesus was proclaiming to Peter and the disciples and to the world that he was the chief servant. And washing feet was not nearly as humiliating as him being crucified. Then Jesus tells them that they must become feet washers. Verse 14 says, "If I then, your Lord and teacher, have washed your feet, you also ought to wash one another's feet." In other words, the disciples were to become servants themselves. The way up is down. Now, what does it look like in the business world? What comes to mind immediately for me is the TV show Undercover Boss. The CEO who disguises himself or herself and does entry-level work that nobody notices. In doing so, the leader realizes or remembers what it was like to do hard labor. But more importantly, the leader identifies with their people. The leader becomes a servant. What would it look like for you and me as business leaders to serve our employees without putting on a disguise? What ugly, messy, yucky things are you willing to do for your people? To the extent that you are willing to do these things, that will determine the true type of servant leader that you really are. Thanks for listening, and have a great weekend.